Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we will continue our discussion of Freemasons for Dummies by Chris Hodap.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, we have three-quarters of our hosts here. We have very worshipful brother David Colbeth, who's a member of King Solomon Lodge number 60 in Auburn, Washington. I'm Matt Appel, and I'm a member of Mill Creek 243 in Montlake Terrace, Washington. And we have Craig Graham, who's from almost messed it up again. Kalamalka Lodge number 160 up in British Columbia. Steve couldn't be here with us. He's having a family medical emergency, so we hope all goes well with that. But we wish him the best, and we're going to soldier on without him somehow. So before the extended break that we took from recording, because we recorded all those episodes at the Conference of Grand Masters, we were reading chapter 2 of Freemasons for Dummies. And we think we left up right about at the Jacobites in France. So, yeah, that's where we're going to start. So he has a little section there about the Jacobites and the support of Bonnie Prince Charlie, and moving to France and such. Do we have thoughts on this, or is there?
Yeah, I was fascinated to read more and learn, that France was France was a place where the English would flee basically and, take refuge in France. I guess I didn't really realize that. I can't say that I'm much of a historian, so I do enjoy history and learning about it. I'm not a student of it necessarily. So it's been kind of fun to learn about this kind of stuff.
There's a good, I remember some of the things that I've read in the past. They're talking about how, Jefferson had years in Paris before the American Revolution, and then he went back, and then the French Revolution is sort of a child of the American Revolution, and then we go to Napoleon after that ended. It's a very, very pivotal moment in Western history. It's one of those things that fundamentally sort of shapes the world. We still has an effect on the world that we live in now.
Yep. And Chris, I know one of our interviews from the Conference of Grand Masters was with Chris Ruley, who is, I don't know if he just put out or is about to put out another book, this one being about Lafayette and his tour of the United States when he returned. After the the American Revolution, he went back to France, and then he came back to the U.S. and did sort of well, it wasn't a whistle-stop tour because there weren't too many trains at the time, but a tour of the United States, and all the dignitaries he met, like entire towns would turn out to meet him and stuff because he was lionized from his activity in the revolution.
So I went down I found a video on YouTube. I think it's a British person or a British group that puts it together, but it's called the channel's called From the Quarries. I don't know if either of you have seen it or heard of it, but it's interesting stuff. It's quite a good channel. Lots of, seems to be from an English perspective based on the way they talk about the degrees and what have you. But this episode that was just released a few days ago was actually about Napoleon and the Freemasons. So I was rewatching that, and there was a reminder at the beginning of the famous people from that revolutionary era who were Freemasons, like Voltaire. Lafayette was another one, and there was a few others. And then it pointed out also that Joseph Guillotin was a Freemason, of which we get the name guillotine, which he's often thought of as having. He sort of suggested its use, and it certainly played a prominent part in the reign of terror during the revolution. But it's funny how people become attached to certain things, or circumstances put them in, and we remember them for their contributions to the cause, so to speak. but it's good video if you get a chance to go back and have a look at it.
You're muted, Matt.
Muted. I just made a great point, but I was muted. So, so yeah. So speaking of Voltaire and the Age of Enlightenment, that's sort of the next little section here. As far as I once heard an interview with Brent Morris, and he was saying how the Masons were the shock troops of the Enlightenment, is what he called it. So
shock troops.
Not sure I go quite that far, but but the Enlightenment thinking certainly pervades a great deal of Masonry. It seems to me, from what I recall of Enlightenment, and from my high school days, because I haven't studied it too much since then. But yeah, it was sort of turned towards science and away from just blind faith and more to verifiable things. And like I said, it seems to be an echo one sees in Masonry for sure.
Yeah, and in my simple Midwest terms, I wrote down as chicken or the egg. Did the fraternity explode because of the popularity of the philosophy, or and the royalty? Was it the royals that brought their met to Freemasonry, or did Freemasonry change the royals' theories and ideas of philosophy? And so it was, he talks about how the Germans, they often referred to Masonry as the royal art because there were so many royal people or royalties being part of it, and they created lodge by royal decree, according to Chris. And so it was interesting to read about that.
I think one of the things too, as you look at, is that you can have a chicken and egg view of it, or you sometimes think about right place, right time, because you have approaching the Enlightenment, you already had a movement in European countries where class distinctions were starting to blur. Upward mobility was happening. Literacy was starting to climb. And you had organizations like Freemasonry that were willing, I'm not going to say to accept anybody, but you were kind of allowed to cross boundaries by joining a Masonic lodge, because you would be socializing with people that under normal circumstances in a previous generation you would not normally sit down and be conversant with. And that sort of, I believe that idea, like there's something I read once that said that a lot of people in India were amazed at the British lodges that were formed there, because they had so many people from different races and religions that were getting together in these meetings. Of course, that's much later than the era we're talking about right now. But this is kind of the start of that, where the people that were really joining and pushing this organization were willing to, I'm not going to say overlook, but we're willing to be on friendly or fraternal and brotherly love terms with people that, like I said, previous generations would not have had anything to do with one another.
Yeah. I remember listening to the recording that we did with the Grand Chancellor, and Matt kind of brought that point alive as well. He said, normally in real life, in regular life, we would not have ever had an opportunity to sit down with not only the Grand Chancellor or somebody that's connected right to the throne, essentially, of England, but just in general, crossing paths with somebody from England, and then even if we were in this fraternity, because of the opportunity of the Conference of Grand Masters as well, and our having to be part of what we're doing right here in the show, there's a lot of things. I coined the phrase "as if by magic." Things happen as if by magic, right? They come together. I know it's not magic. I believe there's an ether, there's an energy of sorts, and I think things happen, like you said, happen for a reason. And but also having prepared ourselves to be ready for those opportunities too. Put yourself in that right position. You got to get off your butt, and even though the door is open unto us, you got to get off your butt and get out the door, or open the door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the section just before that, he talks about deism a little bit, and that this idea of Freemasonry was looked down on a little bit, especially by the Catholics, because they thought it was essentially replacing religion, right?
Well, and I'm a little lost on that part of it, because I don't quite understand what deism is. And I know that some of the founding fathers in the United States were proponents of that particular type of faith. And in fact, I think even for a time in the US after the American Revolution, there was almost a deist Bible that was published, and you could find, I think you might be able to still find it. And I believe it's just basically a stripped down version of the Bible. You know, the sort of the philosophical books have been left into it, but the more well, I don't even know how to describe it, because, like I said, it's not a subject I'm all that good with. So I don't know if one of you guys has read up on it.
Go for it.
My understanding from what little I know is essentially deism says that there is a supreme being, and he started things going, but he doesn't intervene much anymore, and that's about it. It's not Christian or anything else ish. It's just sort of, there was somebody started the snowball down the hill, and now here we are.
Yeah, Chris alludes to it in that section. He, like, as God was like the divine watchmaker, that once it's set in motion, no further tinkering is needed. And they don't believe in miracles or prophets or revelations or saviors, so to speak, but that he exists, you know, and you should have an awe or a reverence for God because of the discovery of his divine plan, personal growth, and constant search for knowledge. And so there is the idea of personal development or development of the man, but it's somewhat due to the previous things being set in motion, like Matt said.
Yeah, okay, and that makes sense from the perspective of if all of us think back to when we were preparing to join the lodge, how we were asked about our particular views on you know, in my own case, I was asked if I believed in the higher power, and that's exactly the way the question was framed to me, because it's not, you know, since we can't really discuss religion, we're not supposed to, you know, you don't really examine what a potential brother's particular vector is. You just you make sure that there's a belief in a supreme being, a belief in the revelation of will, and a belief in rewarding of virtue and punishing of vice. That those, you know, you have those beliefs, they're consistent with one another, and that's it. You're not asked about a particular, you know, not asked by the road how you got there. You're just asked if you're there, kind of thing.
This is totally off topic, and we should probably just make it a whole separate show subject, but I'm curious. We talk a lot about in Masonry about the all-seeing eye that will judge us according to our merits, and we talk about the how we want the there you go, it's staring at me right now. For those of you who are listening and not watching the video, David has behind him an all-seeing eye in the window of a door behind him, so it's always staring at us. But the judgment that we talk about in our ritual, at least here in Washington, does not, so I guess it does not always jibe with the Reformed Christian tradition of faith will save you, and being forgiven and that sort of thing. And I'm curious about that. It's a topic I'd really like to research some and discuss, but again, probably not for right now.
Put it on the agenda. For sure.
I'll put it on the list for future discussion.
Absolutely.
Well, I would take a look at that too, because, you know, we have deism right in front of us. So I would be interested in what the deists thought about you know, what cosmological change happens at the end of life. Like if you're judged, and what happens in that judgment, you know, is there an upstairs and a downstairs, or what is the, you know, that, because that's always been something that's certainly, I think, at the time that we're talking about in this episode, that's something that happened a lot, because for a long time the Catholics had the concept of purgatory, and then I think that was kind of moved away as the church made philosophical shifts over the years. So these ideas are sort of mutable and change over time.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, definitely, yeah, it would be kind of fun to come back to that, Matt. We can talk about religion. We're not in lodge.
There you go.
Well, coming to America. Now we've left France and Germany and we're in America.
Yeah, it's always my understanding, and I could be wrong, is that that's how we end up with half the Grand Lodges in the U.S. being AF and AM and half of them being F and AM. Because it's a hangover from when the Grand Lodges here were provincial Grand Lodges here were formed after the schism in England. So that always struck me as interesting that they managed to make up, but we didn't.
I thought we were always taught that they just forgot to add the ancient one day, and that's enough.
That was someone told me Washington comes from Oregon, and Oregon
Right.
is ancient, but Washington is not.
Yeah.
And someone told me once that it was because the first Grand Secretary of Washington didn't like his counterpart in Oregon, and so he decided to change it to. I have no idea if that's true or not, but it would be funny if it were.
That's some of those anecdotes that just seems, I don't know. It's so fitting that whenever you get human beings involved in something like that, that you're going to have that kind of thing. It's like, well, no, I don't like that person, so I just have to do this one small thing to differentiate it. And now here's 150 years of people going, well, how did that happen?
Yep. I'd like to think as Masons we're above some of that stuff, but it still happens.
Oh yeah,
we try.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it arrived in the colonies essentially, or in America, pretty rapidly, pretty soon, right? And I didn't realize just that lodges were being started without the blessing of any Grand Lodge or provincial official, I guess. And so, but I suppose that might need to happen. And I think you talked about Craig, about the military units that happened quite a bit with military units.
Well, they were, and the regiments, and quite a few of them. And there's actually, I think, there's some regiments in the British Army that still, there's 2 or 3 of them that still hold Masonic warrants, I believe, from Scotland. I'd have to do some research into that. And at one time during the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts, I think the Grand Lodge of Ontario here actually warranted a lodge over with one of the Canadian military units. So this is still something that goes on, and so these lodges essentially just traveled wherever that particular regiment was sent to, and there was quite a number of them. So that could have been a way that Freemasonry was kind of salted through the colonies. And then the other thing where people were just forming lodges. I mean, like you say, that given the time, the circumstances, the fact that if you ever decided to mail a letter to somebody, it took months, not days, not weeks, but months to get from you to the other person. If you really wanted to form a lodge and get active, the only sort of option you had was to just get people together and later on do the old ask for beg for forgiveness rather than ask permission kind of thing. There's a reflection of that in the during the wars, the First World War, Second World War, all have examples of lodges being formed in prisoner of war camps, for instance. And then later on, the respective jurisdictions would recognize anybody that was initiated, passed, and raised in a prisoner of war setting, because, like you say, that's how it was. That's all you had. That was the only option if you had a bunch of Freemasons locked up. Well, they're still going to want to go to lodge. So that's where that came from.
And that's also where, in sort of the next little section there, that's where the Prince Hall Grand Lodge came from, or Prince Hall Masonry came from. Those brothers, I believe, were originally initiated in a military lodge that was in Boston there, and then subsequently, as I've said before, I think it is a blot on Masonry that the Prince Hall system exists, because they were subsequently not recognized by the mainstream Grand Lodges in the area, and entirely understandably decided to go their own way, which made sense.
Was it in one of your recent interviews at the Cogmina there that you had somebody say, how can we not recognize the Prince Hall because their origins are from the Grand Lodge of England? Did somebody say that in one of the interviews? Or maybe it was something else I was watching. I don't know, but that was what was somebody that essentially that was the logic of their question, was like, well, how can we not recognize the Prince Hall, because their heritage goes right back to a regular and stable jurisdiction.
Yep.
Yeah.
And absolutely does. Yes.
Yeah. And I know the Grand Lodge of New Jersey was controversial for quite a number of years, because they actually had a regular warranted lodge in New Jersey. I think it was called, or it may still exist, Alpha Lodge, and I don't know the number, but it was essentially a lodge for Black Masons, but it was a regular lodge on the roll of the Grand Lodge of New Jersey. And again, it was something that was of note in American Freemasonry for quite a number of years.
I think I hadn't heard that. Actually, I'll have to look that up.
Yeah.
So actually, to go back a topic, I learned recently that the first Mason we can prove was here in America, in North America, was actually in New Jersey. He owned a big plot of several hundred acres in western New Jersey. The Grand Lodge of New Jersey celebrates him every year. It has a little thing at his gravesite and stuff that they do every year. So I want to say 1730, something like that. Really early on.
He was already Mason, came to the colonies.
I'm sorry.
He was already Mason that came to the U.S.
Yes. Yes.
Huh. Interesting.
So didn't quite come over on the Mayflower then.
Not quite.
A few years later. Later.
Okay.
Well, and talking about Prince Hall too, we in Washington in 1887, the Grand Lodge of Washington, the members wanted to recognize Prince Hall as a regular lodge, and it was referred to committee at our end of communication in 1887, and then in 1889 or 1888, essentially the next year, they voted it in, approved it, but then they were ridiculed nationwide. I don't know if it was global or not, but at least nationwide. And they had to unfortunately, retract that recognition. And Grandmaster William H. Upton at the time was a Grandmaster in 1889. And then he died in 1906. And I'd found a really cool video, if I could find the link again, about his service, where he didn't want to have any Masonic recognition on his gravestone until Prince Hall was recognized in the state of Washington. And so when he passed away he died in 1906, and he didn't want to have it. And then, but in 1990, finally, so many years later, the Grand Lodge of Washington recognized Prince Hall officially, and they had a ceremony and at his graveside and carved the Masonic symbol into the stone, and then epitaph as well. And there was a really, really neat presentation, as good a quality as you can get in 1990 VHS, low def. But it was really interesting to hear the messages and the discussions, and the orator, the Grand Lodge order, was really, really amazing. He did. No offense, Matt. Matt was our Grand Order in the past. He did a wonderful job as well. We've had some good Grand Orders, but I'm always impressed by somebody that you just lock in and you just can't stop not listening to that and tell a story, even though he did some of the history in there, but then he'd tell a story and you think, where is this going? Where's this going? And then boom, then there's the result or the eye opener. And I really enjoy those kind of things. He was really, really amazing. But yeah, small tale about Washington. It's always, as Matt would call it, a blight on the history of Grand Lodge of Washington too, that we stood our ground and then said, maybe not.
And as we talked with what was his name, Julius, past Grand Master of the
Prince Hall
Grand Lodge, Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Washington and jurisdiction.
Yeah.
And as he pointed out, there's the end jurisdiction includes British Columbia, so the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Washington has at least one lodge in Vancouver that I'm aware of, and I don't know if there are others as well, but
yeah,
that's part of their Prince Hall territory, sort of.
And wasn't he saying he was going to go to Japan? He right after that, and we're like, Japan? He goes, yeah, that's part of the territory. I was like, what? Half the world?
Yeah, it is. It's like Japan, Guam, Germany. I want to say there's a whole they're all over the place. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, just it's not amazing that Masonry is all over the place. Well, it is kind of, but the Prince Hall Grand Lodge, Washington, and jurisdiction is all over the place.
Covers the rest of the world. Somehow Washington got that distinction. I don't know. The jumping off point.
Yeah.
And then I guess over the years too, I'd say I picked up a little bit on some other info I got. Prince Hall, the Prince Hall jurisdictions developed the full slate of Freemasonry, didn't they? Like there's a sort of a York Rite, a Scottish Rite. I think there's a Prince Hall shrine in existence at one time or another. So it was in a completely parallel form of there was two streams of Freemasonry in the United States at one time.
Amongst all the other clandestines.
Not that we think Prince Hall Masonry is clandestine.
No. I apologize if that came off that way. That's not what I was. Yeah, there's lots of other stuff going on too besides all the others. Yeah, and speaking of that, there was in the next section talks about how lots of in that late 1700s, early 1800s, 36 different Masonic groups, 26 orders, admitting women, and 1,400 different degree rituals were happening. So I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, is that there's just lots of other stuff happening, and who knows what any of it was sanctioned or approved or all that.
All right. And with that, I feel like we're getting to a stopping point here. It's about that time in the show. So does anybody have any final thoughts we'd like to express before we sign off?
Oh, I'm good.
I don't think so.
All right, then. So we'd like to thank all you all for listening and to our ramblings and checking us out on making comments or sending emails to on social media and that sort of stuff. Man, I'm making a word salad out of this. The idea is in there.
Find us on Facebook and YouTube.
Exactly. Yeah, we like to hear from you. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, for
so
sure.
There are various ways to do so. And with that, on behalf of the absent Steve and Craig and David and myself, we thank you all for listening to the Working Tools Podcast. Goodbye.